Good evening. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Ellery Rhodes, and my pronouns are he, him, or they, them. This week's Parsha, which begins in Leviticus chapter 6, details the 6 different rituals God told Moses to command Aaron and his sons to follow. The Parsha ends with Moses assembling the community at the entrance of the tent of meetings, where he followed God's commandment to anoint Aaron and his sons, then send up several offerings to ordain them. While only male descendants were ordained under God's orders, these same orders mentioned threes throughout. For example, while consecrating the tabernacle, Moses sprinkled anointing oil on the altar, the utensils, and the laver. When dressing Aaron's sons, Moses clothed them in tunics, sashes, and turbans. When carrying out the purgation offering, Moses removed the fat around the entrails, liver, and kidneys. During the slaughtering of the ram of ordination, Moses put blood from the ram on the ridge of the right ear, the thumb of the right hand, and the big toe of the right foot of Aaron and his sons. Throughout this ritual, we are repeatedly reminded that God had commanded these specific actions and that these offerings provided an odor that was pleasing to God. We are also often reminded that God has a reason behind all of his orders. As Reconstructionists, we don't necessarily believe that God literally gave these commands, but we do search for deeper meanings in the Torah portions, meanings that are relevant to today. I'd like to offer my interpretation as we come together this week to celebrate Trans Community Shabbat. Why would God interweave so many specified threes into these rituals? Well, every Shabbat, we are reminded that we are made in God's image. Aaron and his sons were chosen by God to oversee and care for all of God's people. The rituals for ordination, with their utilization of threes, may have been created by God as a way to acknowledge the inclusion and equal importance of all his people, male, female, and non-binary. 2 of God's orders in particular seem to affirm this: the breads and the slaughtering of the first ram. In the Parsha, God ordered Moses to include an unleavened bread without oil, an unleavened bread with oil, and a wafer in the offering. All 3 breads are viewed as equal and pleasing by God, despite the wafer likely being notably smaller than the other 2 breads. Similarly, the transgender community makes up a very small percentage of the population in Maryland, as well as the US and the world. But under this interpretation, the transgender community is seen as equal by God and deserving of the same rights and respects afforded to the men and women in our lives. For the burnt offering, God commanded that Moses must separate the first ram into the head, suet, and sections. By not providing us with the specific size or number of sections, the only limits we have are our own creation. Similarly, the idea that gender is binary, or that all transgender people can only fit into these binary choices or a third homogeneous category, are limits that we have placed on ourselves and others. The transgender umbrella includes trans men, trans women, two-spirit, agender, non-binary, gender fluid, demigender, transmasculine, transfeminine, genderqueer, gray gender, bigender, pangender. The list goes on. This is why we say that gender is a spectrum, because just like the color spectrum, there are seemingly no limits on how many gender identities there are, but they're all valid. This same umbrella can, at times, also include intersex people, drag queens and kings, crossdressers, and more. Despite this vast variety of identities that the trans community can encompass, we do belong under one umbrella, just as the sections of the ram are listed as one term. Just like the ram sections might have been few and small or large and many, so too are the many identities the trans community represents. Our size does not decide our importance or legitimacy, for we're just as desirable, pleasant, and holy to God, whether we are few or many. This Sunday, March 31st, is International Transgender Day of Visibility, a yearly day to raise awareness about transgender discrimination and our struggles worldwide, as well as celebrate our achievements and contributions. While this day is often overlooked, this year it is being dwarfed By Easter Sunday, the Cherry Blossom Festival, Ramadan, British summertime clock shifts, and dozens of other special days, weeks, and month-long celebrations, seemingly diminishing this important day and the trans community by default. While International Transgender Day of Visibility is only one day, the trans community exists every day and may be closer to home than you'd expect. Not all trans people have come out as trans. Some are still questioning. Some can't safely come out. Some have transitioned and just want to blend into society. And some may not identify as trans. This does not make them any less a part of the trans community or less deserving of rights and inclusion. God has reminded us time and time again since he gave his commands to Moses thousands of years ago that the world is not binary and that regardless of the labels we ascribe to, the other that makes up the third group are as vital, holy, and pleasing to God as the binaries we hold in high esteem. If we are to truly follow God's word, we must strive to view the trans community as our equals and actively work to become true allies. So how can you begin to do this? Add your pronouns to any name tags, video call name sections, or email signatures you possibly can. By doing so, you help prevent trans coworkers, synagogue members, classmates, etc., from being singled out, improve the safety available to trans individuals in these spaces, normalize pronoun inclusion, and signal to others that you are striving to be a reliable ally. If you're using a gendered bathroom and see someone walk in that doesn't look like the gender, don't stare, don't start questioning them, and please don't unnecessarily call security or the police. Simply let them use the bathroom and either leave them alone or treat them like everyone else. If you get someone's pronouns or name wrong, stop what you were saying, correct your mistake by saying something quickly like, "Oh, sorry, I meant Y, not X," and move on with your discussion. Don't profusely apologize or make it a big deal. If someone you know wants to be called by a new name or pronouns, don't pelt them with questions, get defensive, argue that their request isn't real, insist that it isn't proper English, or make it a big deal. Work on using the new words, calmly correct any mistakes, be open to polite correction by others, and be open to more changes down the line if they happen. Many trans people need time to figure out what feels most comfortable to them, and not all people who question their gender identity ultimately end up permanently changing their gender identity. This is normal. And by being accepting without making a big deal out of these changes, you can allow these people to safely explore and figure out what works best for them. Don't ask a trans person what their old name was, what genitalia they have, if they're on hormones, if they've had surgeries, or any other personal questions. Be open-minded and willing to educate yourself without solely relying on the trans community to teach you. And most importantly, please be patient. To be fair, the trans community can often use this friendly reminder as well. Figuring out who we are can take time. Feeling safe enough to come out can take time. And learning new pronouns or a new name can take time. Just as the ordination rituals Moses undertook in the Parsha took 7 days to complete, we all have to remember that even positive change takes time. Mistakes may happen, individuals may decide transitioning is not for them. Pronouns may change, and that's okay. Being willing to do the work and create the space we want to be a part of is the first step for each and every one of us. So I'd like to offer you the following challenge: to take these first steps towards being a fierce ally or an understanding trans person. If we all put in the work, uplift each other, and begin embracing patience and grace, we will all be deemed pleasant and holy by God, and we'll begin to create a better tomorrow for all. I'd like to leave you with a poem from the book Lady Death, written by the phenomenal transgender poet Keith Silva, called "Thank You, My Allies." When you call me by my name and pronouns I adore, you give me a gentle, warm hug, a hand up, a healing balm, a bright smile in the dark, a heart-opening wink, a bouquet of sunflowers, a yarrow blossom circle of protection, a tender rose of sweetness, years on my life, a burst of energy, the ability to focus, a nourishing sense of safety and belonging, a happy memory, a warm cup of lemon balm love. When you call me by my name and pronouns I adore, you give me wellness, welcome, and home. Thank you. First, I would like to take a moment to thank our Racial Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, John Reel, Andy Friedman, David Friedman, Ronnie Brown, and everyone else who helped make this trans community Shabbat a reality. Before we continue to Mourner's Kaddish, I would like to read one more poem from the book Lady Death in honor of International Transgender Day of Visibility this Sunday that I feel drives home the fear, pain, and harm that can be inflicted on the transgender community when our pronouns and names are not respected and efforts aren't being made. It's called Misgendered. I liken how I feel when you call me lady or ma'am to being a balloon that has suddenly popped, an unexpected slap in the face, a jolt, a fright, a startling concern that maybe we're living in different universes, and therefore I am utterly alone, invisible and lost to the day. I feel angry when I get misgendered. My heart races because I have been branded, stamped, labeled, boxed, denied access to truth and connection, completely misunderstood, not accounted for, unprotected, not remembered. Being misgendered derails my day like a train knocked off its tracks, a child falling off a swing, or a bird being shot in mid-flight. I try to shield myself from being misgendered by staying home, not going to parties, declining social invitations, lowering my voice, wearing certain clothing, avoiding certain people, circles, towns, establishments, walking with a strut, wearing a pronoun, mask, hat, shirt, button, and still the onslaught continues. Each time it happens, the quandary faces me. Shall I defend and assert myself, thus enduring the excuses, the hostility, the falling all over themselves with guilt, the explanations, the defenses, the cascades of them hating themselves because I exist? Or shall I just take the blow, shrink, grab my groceries and go? Allowing Lady Death into my life is the freedom of allowing the word lady and all the torture wrapped up in it to die, making space for the sound of who I am to fly. Shabbat Shalom. Yes. And then on the side, I included that some people will ask for just their name to be used instead of any pronouns, and some individuals do ask for it. It is not often, but it does happen. Yeah.
One thing about this discussion is whoever is talking is going to have to use the mic so that people on Zoom can hear.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so we'll be passing the mic around. Right?
I'm bad at that. I wanted to ask if anyone has any questions, because if not,
So I have a question. I don't know how appropriate this is, so someone can check me on this. I work with people, I of course know people that use they, and I don't know exactly what that means or what it means. I don't know what that means.
So, hi, my name is Ignacio. My pronouns are he, him, and I think I can answer your question. So, we have, so we're all familiar with the personal pronouns he, she, but another personal pronoun that's actually been in use in the singular since around Shakespeare's time is they. They has been used in the singular since like the 15 or 1600s. And someone might want to be referred to as they if they do not fit within the gender binary of male or female. And Ellery?
I was just going to add, because I know people with the binary, even with male or female, like I identify as trans masculine because I feel masculine, but I don't feel like I am man, hear me roar. And I know people who identify as trans feminine, and it's that same thing of like, I don't feel like, kind of like that, well, I feel like this, but not like 100% this. It doesn't feel like a perfect fit. But that's why like I'm comfortable with he, him, but I also am fine with they, them, just because it's, hey, either one of those kind of fits me. It is still not fitting in the binary, but it's just something that a lot of people don't quite think about and struggle with.
May I? Thank you. Hi, I'm Gwen. My pronouns are she and her. My pronouns are she, her. I will say that I'm not a member, except by one definition here, of the transgender community, but I do know a number of people who fit in there. I had a hard time. It took me a long time to get used to using they and them as singular pronouns, as singular definite pronouns, because it referred to a specific person rather than an unspecified somebody. What helped me visualize, what helped me accommodate to using they and them in the singular is the idea that we all contain multitudes. We all have aspects of masculine and feminine. We all have aspects of, athletic and couch potato, for instance. If you consider they and them to be a way to address all of what a person is without even thinking about gender, then for me that was an easier way to get around to using that.
Does anyone else have a question?
Do I have a question?
Do you have a question? On the handout, I started with some terms, and I know even in queer communities, I've had people be surprised by the difference between transgender umbrella and transgender community, which is why I identified both. Sometimes they get used interchangeably, but they are technically two different things because the umbrella tends to cover more than just people who identify as trans. And I put some statistics in here that are hard to see, and I put a little byline in the top of it that says that these statistics are based solely on reported and obtainable information. So the numbers are likely much higher. They don't know how many are not reported. They don't know how many, because of misgendering that doesn't get corrected, don't get counted. And the numbers for a lot of people see the murdered one and they're like, oh, well, does that include suicides? No, that doesn't include suicides. The number would be a lot higher with suicides. And so far this year, US is number 2 for murders of trans individuals, which I did not put on this because that made me really sad. Number 1 is Brazil. Because Brazil, their estimate is that, I think it's like one trans person gets murdered every like 2 or 3 days. And in the US, it's about once every 2 weeks. And that's just based on the information we have, which is part of why it's like the pronouns is a small thing, but it can make a huge difference. And yeah, as Gwen, and I've heard a lot of other people say, like, they struggle with a lot of the other gender inclusive pronouns besides she, he, or they, and they does take some practice. And it's, these other ones you will probably see less in the US, but you do still see them. Some of them are more common in other countries because they don't have an equivalent word that a lot of them don't have an equivalent word that translates to like the singular they, because they either have multiple or none. And then some of them are, I cannot remember the name of it, the neo-pronouns, which I will admit I don't know that much about. I know they exist, and if someone asks me to use them, I use them, but I am actually very ignorant on that.
Are they on this chart?
Yes, some of them.
Okay.
Faye is one of them. A is one of them. I know ours, ourself is one of them. Some people count the Z and the Z as them, but I do know from individuals that those came into being mostly because of like Asian and like Middle Eastern and stuff like that type of languages that just didn't, the they, them, theirs just did not translate well.
So on the chart, it says Z spelled Z-E, and then Z-I-E, and then her, hers, herself, which has an I instead of an E. As here. Thank you, that's what I wanted to know. Okay, here, here's, here's self. Thank you.
I was just going to clarify that I have also seen it as Z, zir, zirs. So it's, yeah.
Just, I know this is probably kind of obvious to some of you, but on the front of it, it says just under half of the people were killed by a friend, family member, or partner. That means their friend, family member, or partner killed them.
Yeah, and those are, again, just those statistics of who killed them and the misgendering are only the ones that they were able to solve. And just with those being the ones that were solved, there's still a lot where they don't know, but it's likely comparable or higher, unfortunately. There are a lot of religions that have issues with trans individuals, whether or not their religious texts actually say that. There are also a lot of communities that have a lot of issues with that. A lot of people just don't understand it. And there's less safeties in place for trans individuals than the rest of the LGBTQ community, even with laws. Even here in Maryland, it's less for trans individuals than it is for gay, lesbian individuals. I wanted to point out one thing that is a nuance of in the tips for integrating pronoun usage, I said that, where did it go? Oh, try to avoid asking what someone's preferred pronouns are if they haven't provided more than one set of pronouns. It seems like a simple thing. The transgender community was initially okay with it and then pushed back, largely because a lot of individuals who were basically trying to have an excuse to get out of using them were going, well, they're preferred, and we're using that as an excuse. So the trans community over the last several years has switched to basically going, unless there's more than one set of pronouns like visibly available on someone, don't call them preferred, or don't ask like, which, do you have a preference or anything like that? Because unfortunately, people will use whatever little crevices and avenues they can use to continue being bigoted. And taking away one of those avenues is helpful.
So maybe I'll just mention one thing. The name tags that we have, there are stickers out there that you can put your pronouns on with them. And I bought some more because we weren't sure if we had any out there, but it turns out there were some in the basket. Yeah. So, but the ones I bought, sometimes they're pre-printed, and if your combination doesn't exist in the pre-printed ones, there are blank ones that you can, and there's a marker out there that you can write your own pronouns on them, and then you can just place them on your name tag, because it is helpful if you wear a name tag. So helpful that I couldn't find my name tag. I have no idea where it is. That's why I don't have one on. So, so we're going to try and do that. Eventually, the committee's been talking about trying to find a way to actually print the pronouns as well as names on the name tags, but we haven't figured out how to, it'll be an optional thing that people can do, but we haven't figured out how to do that yet, so.
The other thing that the committee is hoping to do, but again, we're still researching how this is possible / if, is on Shul Cloud having, for people who opt in, the pronouns available next to their name or stuff like that. Because I know when I joined, and there are plenty of people at the synagogue that don't know me, they don't always remember my pronouns, whatever, would go and they would need to email me about something, and they would automatically revert to she just because I have female features, and then feel bad misgendering me in the email, but they don't have a way to check that. And there is currently a way to put your pronouns in, but they're not visible. And there are only 3 options, and you can only choose one at a time. So these are 2 different things that we are trying to work on, because we've done a lot, but we want to try and make that step further so that it's a little bit easier for everyone and there's less opportunity for misgendering.
And that's a good segue to what is probably a very touchy subject, which is that in a couple of the poems you read, in one of the poems you read tonight, the poet rather alluded to having to dress a certain way and having to present a certain way in order to not be misgendered. Well, and it can be very difficult for your cishet people to not try to we do tend to assume we do tend to assume pronouns based on based on gender presentation, and I've done it myself. It's hard to know what to do. It's hard. It's easy to make mistakes, and so we shouldn't require anyone in the trans community to present a certain way, and yet we feel sometimes if we make a mistake that it's that people will be angry at us. So that's.
So and I'm asking your personal opinion on this, would you say if I don't know someone's preferred gender, would you say I should call them using they, them, or?
So there's a few things you can do. If it's someone you haven't met before, or it's been a long time or something like that, you can always do the good old, if it's a new person, hi, my name is Ellery, and my pronouns are he, him, they, them. What's yours? You can also always fall back on, if you do know the person, oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot your name, and then basically reintroduce yourself, because we all forget sometimes, and you can use that as a fallback, even if you do know, just because can sometimes break the ice. You can use just they, them. Some people get uncomfortable with it. There's really no 100% correct answer, unfortunately. Or if you know their name, you could just use their name. Because most individuals, even if they're not comfortable with they, them, are fairly comfortable with just their name being used in place of pronouns if you aren't sure.
or you could just be very direct and ask them. I feel like, me personally, I think if we make that the norm to just ask people, then it's gonna become more accepted.
And as for the clothing thing and the dressing, that's why in my drosh I said that, you know, the trans people, the trans community really could use the reminder to be patient sometimes as well. As much as it would be awesome if clothing and haircuts and nail polish and stuff like that weren't considered gendered, and it is starting to move that way. It is a long process. Again, it's going to take time. I think it's one of those mistakes happen. If you hear yourself making a mistake, try to correct it like quickly and move on. Because if you, and I know you probably know this, but if you go, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, da, 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 da. Even though that might seem like it's a good thing, and it tends to draw the attention to the trans individual, and that can actually be unsafe and really uncomfortable, and can also unintentionally push them away. It's also very annoying. Yeah. And if you know someone is trans, or even just exploring or whatever, like, let people wear what they want. If you get a little confused by it, like, we're all human, we make mistakes. The big thing here is, like, as long as you're making an effort and you're trying and you're learning, you're doing great. The problem is when people get lazy or like intentionally just are not willing to, because they're different types of issues, but they're both bad. Because if you just kind of get complacent and lazy and aren't willing to at least try, whether you mean to or not, that comes across as much as like, well, I don't care, this isn't important. Or like, oh, this is just a phase, or, oh, well, this is just something your generation's doing. When there are trans individuals, literally throughout history, there are examples of them. There are not many examples because they have been destroyed and the trans community has been suppressed throughout most of history.
Like, well, honestly, most who identify as women have been suppressed throughout history. But I find it interesting that sometimes the trans community, because a member, someone who is a member of the trans community themselves may assume gender of other people and have it be wrong. I was struck. I'm sorry, Ellery, that you used masculine pronouns to refer to the divine tonight, which I found a little interesting. And maybe, you know, we all have a history that we bring our own biases to. We're raised a certain way, and we bring our own biases to that. We can't really help that. So
That was intentional. Yeah. One, to try and get people to think that did pick up on it, and two, because there are some individuals, I was raised Roman Catholic, I know there are some individuals who, no matter what you're saying, as soon as they hear God called anything other than he, their brain shuts down, they're not gonna hear the rest of the message. So it was kind of that twofold of like, hey, people who catch it and it doesn't, like, think, yeah, but there are some individuals where it would just shut the conversation down right there. So it was like better to put it there and have it be a, wonder why, instead of a like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you did that. So.
I just want to say, I think it's wonderful that this is happening, and what great courage. You know, it's interesting. Years ago, I lived in Colorado, and I had some time, so I started auditing courses because I'm interested in it at a Methodist seminary at the University of Denver called the Iliff School of Theology, and it's a very liberal Protestant seminary. And that was my first experience with using pronouns, because it was a fatal error in any paper turned in at Iliff School of Theology if you referred to God in the masculine. You had to use they, them, or she sometimes if you did it interchangeably, encompassing the masculine thing. And that was my very first experience of dealing with gender outside of, let's say, conventional wisdom, which started to the point where, you know, I'm here tonight. We have a person in our life who started out as our niece and is now our nephew. And in that time, when she was very depressed, moody, upset, prickly. And we visited him, and he's at the University of Delaware, a school which is very far-reaching in gender issues. They have an entire dorm dedicated to people who want to be more inclusive or inclusive following, things like that. And our former niece is now our nephew named Oliver. And Oliver is much happier. And I thought I would have problems with pronouns. Never a mistake the entire time I was with him. He is an entirely different person. Happy, that's the best part. And you know, the thing is that when you take a look at society on this issue, it's like a highway with one-way traffic, and you're going against the traffic. It's going to take a long time, but you got to get people to think about it and stop and say, wait a minute. As you pointed out, there's hundreds of ways to define gender as opposed to the binary, which to get people out of that mode is a real shift. Just the first thing, like me at the Iliff School of Theology about papers where you could not say God, he. You know, it's a process, and you've begun the process, and again, spoke to the congregation, and it was wonderful, wonderful. Congratulations.
I know it was a little while ago, but you were also saying that, like, about how there were, like, haircuts and, like, it can be misgendered and stuff, but it is getting better, and yeah, I for sure agree with that. I have, like, friends and classmates who are male, who have long hair. One of them will wear skirts sometimes. I've had classmates who go by she, her, and have short hair. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's getting better. And I also go by male and have longer hair.
I think if no one else has any more questions, we're going to end it there. If anyone has any questions,
I don't have a question. I just want to say it's really an important conversation. I'm grateful that you and the committee brought this to Oseh Shalom.
I just wanted to end with, if anyone does end up with questions or anything down the line, I'm willing to answer questions, even if you think it's dumb or it might be inappropriate. I am generally willing to be a sounding board so that if you're not sure, you don't have to worry about feeling like an idiot or anything like that as much as possible. And the RDI committee is also willing to help as much as we can. Okay.
I have one question.
Thank you everyone for coming.
How do we get a copy of the handout? I can't get it through Google. Despite the fact I have a Google account, it won't let me in.